On a cold November night in 1972, in a modest home in a small English town, a mother looked at her son. Tears welled up in Evelyn Kilmister's eyes. Her son, Ian Fraser Killmister, would become known to the world as Lemmy. But at that moment, she was just a mother watching her son disappear. He stood at the bus stop, suitcase in hand, hair long and eyes weary. He was about to go on tour with a strange band called Hawkwind. Evelyn didn't know it then, but the decision he made that night would change rock music history forever. The mother hugged her son and whispered in his ear, "Please, Ian, leave this band. They're going to kill you." Lemmy didn't answer. He just looked into his mother's eyes and walked out the door. That day, the wound that opened in his mother's heart would bleed for 40 years. If you want to follow Lemmy Kilmister's story and discover the unknown truths of rock history, please subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. The end of this story will shock you. Evelyn Kilmister's life was that of an ordinary Englishwoman. She had married into the Killmister family, and her husband came from a deeply religious background. Lemmy's father was conservative enough to become an Anglican vicar. Growing up in the grey, quiet atmosphere of post-war England in the town of Stoke-on-Trent, little Ian was his mother's only hope and future. Evelyn dreamed her son would become a doctor, maybe a teacher. But Ian had other plans brewing in his head. When he first heard Elvis Presley at 15 years old, his life changed. When he told his mother, "Mom, I'm going to be a musician," Evelyn laughed. Back then, it seemed like just a childish dream. But as the years passed, that dream became reality. Ian picked up his guitar, ran away from home, and started making music on the streets of Manchester. Every night, Evelyn would look out the window, hoping her son would come back. But Ian never returned. By 19, he had already taken the name Lemmy. The name came from constantly begging, "Lemmy a fiver," asking people for £5. What his mother didn't know was that Lemmy wasn't just making music anymore. He had plunged into London's underground culture, experimented with drugs, and become Jimi Hendrix's roadie. When Evelyn learned this truth, something broke inside her heart. Her son was no longer the child she knew. In 1968, Lemmy was living in London and working on Jimi Hendrix's crew. When Evelyn visited her son, what she saw horrified her. Psychedelic posters on the walls, empty bottles on the floor, the smell of marijuana in the air, and her son lying exhausted on the couch. Evelyn cried, "Ian, what kind of life is this? You weren't raised like this. What would your father say if he saw you?" Lemmy just looked at his mother and answered, "Mom, I'm not Ian anymore. I'm Lemmy, and this is my life." That day, as Evelyn rode the train home, looking at London's dirty buildings through the window, she wept. She had lost her son. When 1972 arrived, Lemmy was 30 years old and playing bass guitar with a space rock band called Hawkwind. Hawkwind was one of England's most interesting and radical bands. They were known for psychedelic music, stage shows, and drug culture. When Evelyn first heard that her son was in Hawkwind, she couldn't even pronounce the band's name. "Haw, what? What does that mean?" she asked. Lemmy smiled and explained, "Hawkwind, Mom. We create storms in music." Evelyn was not pleased with this explanation at all. She had a bad feeling in her heart. When they started touring with Hawkwind, Evelyn tried calling her son every week, but Lemmy rarely answered the phones. Evelyn read about Hawkwind concerts in local newspapers. Hundreds of fans pass out from drugs at Hawkwind concert. Police raid Hawkwind tour. Hawkwind members questioned for drug use. each headline stabbed into Evelyn's heart like a dagger. One night, Evelyn couldn't take it anymore and called Lemmy. "Ian, please leave this band. These people are going to kill you. The drugs, the scandals. This will be your end." Lemmy was silent on the phone for a long time, then said, "Mom, I'm happy here. For the first time in my life, I feel like I belong somewhere." But Evelyn wasn't wrong. Hawkwind wasn't just a band, it was a lifestyle. The band members constantly used LSD, even on stage. During concerts, Lemmy would take speed, amphetamine. This drug gave him limitless energy. He could stand on stage for hours, playing bass without rest, but the price was heavy. Lemmy's face grew pale. Dark circles formed under his eyes, and he lost 20 pounds. When Evelyn saw her son at a concert, she didn't recognize him. The man who walked on stage wasn't her Ian. This was a ghost, with glassy eyes and a skeletal body. In 1973, Evelyn decided to warn Lemmy one last time. She visited her son at his small apartment in London. When he opened the door, she couldn't hold back her tears at the sight of him. Lemmy hadn't slept for 3 days, his eyes were bloodshot, and his hands were shaking. Speed use was slowly destroying him. Evelyn sat down and looked at her son. "Ian, if you don't leave this band, I'm going to lose you. Do you understand that? As a mother, I'm begging you. Walk away from this life." Lemmy held his mother's hand and said, "Mom, I can't live without speed. Without it, I can't make music. Without it, I can't stand on stage." Evelyn cried and asked, "And how am I supposed to live without you?" That day, as Evelyn rode home on the train, she didn't speak the entire journey. When a woman sitting next to her asked, "Are you all right?" Evelyn just shook her head. But she wasn't all right. She had lost her son and knew she couldn't get him back. Hawkwind was pulling Lemmy deeper every day. Tour, studio, drugs, tour again. The cycle never ended. Every night as Evelyn lay in bed, she prayed, "God, please save my son. Take him away from this band. If I lose him, I'll die too." 1975 became the darkest year in Evelyn Kilmister's life. In May, Hawkwind went on a Canadian tour. As Evelyn saw her son off, she said, "Please be careful." Lemmy just smiled and said, "Mom, I'm always careful." But they both knew that was a lie. Before leaving for the Canadian tour, Lemmy didn't forget to pack plenty of speed in his bag. For Hawkwind concerts, this drug was essential. But something was going to go wrong on that trip. On May 21st, the Hawkwind band arrived at the U.S.-Canada border to cross from a Detroit concert to Toronto. During customs inspection, officers checked Lemmy's bag. They found white powder in a small plastic bag. The customs officer asked, "What is this?" Lemmy didn't panic. He calmly said, "Speed, amphetamine." The officer was surprised because most people would claim it was cocaine. But Lemmy didn't lie. "It's amphetamine, for my personal use." The officers arrested Lemmy. That day, he sat in a small cell in a Canadian jail. He used his one phone call to call his mother, Evelyn. When Evelyn picked up the phone, it was 3 in the afternoon in England. She was relieved to hear her son's voice, but then Lemmy explained what happened. "Mom, I'm in Canada and I've been arrested. They found speed." Evelyn's heart stopped. The phone receiver almost fell from her hand. "What? What did you say, Ian?" Lemmy repeated, "I was arrested for speed. I need to get a lawyer." Evelyn started crying. I told you to leave that band, but you didn't listen. Now what's going to happen?" Lemmy listened quietly and said, "Mom, I'm fine. I'll get out on bail. Don't worry." But Evelyn couldn't do anything but worry. That night, Evelyn didn't sleep at all. She sat up until morning and cried. When neighbors found her crying at her door in the morning, they couldn't bring themselves to ask what happened. Evelyn was so distraught she couldn't speak. Her son was in jail. Her son had become a drug criminal. Evelyn had struggled for years to give her son a good life in England. But now everything had collapsed. Lemmy was released on bail in Canada, but when he returned, the band gave him shocking news. Hawkwind's leader, Dave Brock, cornered Lemmy on the band's bus and said, "Lemmy, you can't play with us anymore. You're fired." Lemmy was shocked. "What? Why?" Dave answered, "You put us all at risk at that border. The police could have questioned the entire band. You only think about yourself." Lemmy protested, "I've been playing in this band for years. You all use speed too." But Dave didn't back down. Lemmy had been fired from Hawkwind. When Lemmy returned to London that day, the first thing he did was call his mother. When Evelyn answered the phone, she heard the desperation in her son's voice. "Mom, I got fired from the band." Evelyn took a deep breath and said, "Maybe this is a good thing, Ian. Maybe now you can go back to a normal life." But Lemmy had different plans. The words he said to his mother that day created new fear in Evelyn's heart. "Mom, I'm going to get revenge. I'm going to start the loudest band in the world and show them." Evelyn groaned inwardly. Revenge, a new band, more drugs, more chaos. Her son would never learn. In June of 1975, Lemmy started a new band. The name was Motorhead. This name also meant speed addict, and Lemmy had chosen it deliberately. When Evelyn heard this name, her stomach turned. "Motorhead? What does that mean?" Lemmy explained, "It means speed freak, Mom. We're going to make fast music." Evelyn didn't say anything anymore. Whatever she said was pointless. Her son was going down his own path, and stopping him was impossible. During Motorhead's first rehearsal days, Lemmy spent 20 hours of every day on music. Speed use increased even more, because working at this pace was impossible without this drug. Evelyn tried to see her son once a month. But at each visit, Lemmy had grown thinner. His skin had turned gray, his eyes had sunk into their sockets, and he coughed constantly. One day Evelyn said, "Ian, I want you to see a doctor." Lemmy refused. "Mom, I'm fine. I'm just working hard." But Evelyn knew her son wasn't fine. Speed was slowly killing him. In 1977, Motorhead released their first album. The album wasn't a huge success, but Lemmy didn't lose hope. They worked harder for the second album. During this process, Evelyn could barely speak with her son. Lemmy had gone on tour, started living in the studio. Evelyn's fears were coming true. Her son no longer belonged only to her. He was rock and roll's prisoner. In 1980, Motorhead released the song Ace of Spades. This song made Motorhead world famous. When Evelyn first heard this song on the radio, she recognized her son's voice, a harsh, rough, angry voice. The lyrics talked about gambling, drinking, and danger. Evelyn cried, "This isn't my son," she said to herself. But to the world, Lemmy was now a rock star. Fans loved him, concerts sold out, albums were selling, but Evelyn, just as a mother, saw her son was lost. Throughout the 80s, Lemmy went on world tours, America, Europe, Japan, concerts everywhere. Evelyn sometimes saw her son on television. On stage, at the microphone, thousands of fans screaming. But Evelyn looked into her son's eyes and saw unhappiness. Lemmy used speed off stage, too. Every day, every hour. The addiction was now out of control. One day, when Evelyn visited Lemmy, she saw how his hands trembled. "Ian, are you still using that drug?" Lemmy didn't answer. The silence was enough. When the 90s arrived, Evelyn Kilmister had grown old. Her hair had turned white, her health had weakened, but her worry for her son never ended. Lemmy was now 50 years old, but he was still using speed, still touring, and still living the same chaotic life. One day, Evelyn asked him, "Ian, have you ever thought about getting married? Having children?" Lemmy smiled and said, "Mom, I already have hundreds of children. My fans are my children." Evelyn wasn't satisfied with this answer. Her son was alone. Yes, on stage, thousands of people applauded him, but when the stage closed, Lemmy was left alone. In hotels, on buses, always by himself. Evelyn knew this because a mother's intuition is never wrong. Even when Lemmy said on the phone, "Mom, I'm happy," Evelyn could hear the loneliness in his tone. When the 2000s arrived, Lemmy was approaching 60 years old. Evelyn was now very old and sick. Doctors told her she wouldn't live much longer. Evelyn wanted to see her son one last time. Lemmy came to England and visited his mother. Evelyn was lying in her bedroom. She had lost weight and was breathing with difficulty. Lemmy sat next to his mother and held her hand. Evelyn looked at her son and with tears in her eyes said, "Ian, I've always loved you. But do you remember that day I asked you to leave Hawkwind?" Lemmy nodded. Evelyn continued, "Was I wrong?" Lemmy didn't answer for a long time. Then he took a deep breath and said, "No, Mom, you weren't wrong. But I couldn't have lived any other way." Evelyn smiled, a bitter smile. "I know, son. You were always like that. But I still pray for you every night. May God protect you." Lemmy kissed his mother and left the room. He stood in the hallway and cried. For the first time in 40 years, he was crying. Evelyn Kilmister passed away in 2005. Lemmy gave a speech at the funeral. He stood at the microphone, looked at his mother's coffin and said, "Mom, you were right. About everything. But I couldn't listen to you. Forgive me." The hundreds of people at the funeral saw Lemmy cry. That day, Lemmy wasn't rock and roll's immortal legend. He was just a son who had lost his mother. In 2015, Lemmy Kilmister turned 70 years old. Health problems had increased. He was diagnosed with diabetes, and doctors told him he couldn't live much longer. In the final days of his life, Lemmy remembered his mother's old words, "Hawkwind will kill you, Ian." Technically, Hawkwind hadn't killed him, but that lifestyle, the speed addiction, years of chaos had finally consumed him. On December 28, 2015, Lemmy Kilmister died at his home in Los Angeles. He had turned 70 just 4 days before his death. The world had lost a legend of rock music, but Evelyn Kilmister was no longer alive and didn't see her son's death. Perhaps this was a mercy. For a mother to witness her son's death is the greatest pain. At Lemmy's funeral, thousands of fans gathered. Rock stars, musicians, fans. They were all there. But Evelyn wasn't there. At the ceremony, old photographs of Lemmy were shown. His childhood, his youth, the Hawkwind days, Motorhead's rise. In one photograph, Lemmy and his mother stood together. Evelyn was hugging her son, smiling. But there was sadness in her eyes. That photo was taken in 1972, just before he joined Hawkwind. That day, Evelyn had told her son, "Leave this band." But Lemmy hadn't listened. Today, Motorhead's legacy continues. Ace of Spades is still played worldwide. Statues of Lemmy are erected. Documentaries are made. Fans don't forget him. But Evelyn Kilmister's tears remained a footnote in history. A mother's pain was lost in the shadow of a rock legend. Evelyn cried for 40 years. Every Hawkwind concert, every Motorhead album, every news story reminded her of her son's loss. Rock history remembers Lemmy as a hero, but for a mother, Lemmy was just Ian. Little Ian. Ian going to school. Ian holding his guitar for the first time. And then Ian, lost. Evelyn's last words on her deathbed were, "Bring Ian back. Please give me my son back." But no one could bring him back. Because Ian had long since become Lemmy, and Lemmy belonged to rock and roll. This story is the story of a mother's tears. Evelyn Kilmister didn't just want her son to be a musician. She wanted her son to live a healthy, happy, safe life. But rock and roll had other plans, and in the end, both Lemmy and Evelyn lost. Lemmy lost his life, and Evelyn had lost her son long before that. If you're listening to music today and Ace of Spades comes on, stop for a minute and think. Behind that music are a mother's tears. Evelyn Kilmister saw her son become famous, but never saw his happiness. Because for her, happiness was Ian being home, safe and healthy. Rock history won't forget Lemmy, but who remembers Evelyn? Perhaps that's the greatest tragedy. When the lights on stage go out, when the applause ends, all that remains is a mother's broken heart. Evelyn Kilmister cried for 40 years, and her tears never dried. Today, as rock fans remember Lemmy, Evelyn's silent pain is still there, somewhere in history, forgotten and invisible. This is the untold side of Lemmy Kilmister's story. Rock and roll's triumph is a mother's tragedy.